Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome everyone to IAIS Forum. This time we are going to talk about Biden's presidency, the future of US foreign policies in the Middle East and the Muslim world. We are very delighted to have three distinguished speakers. Prof. Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, President of International Movement for a Just World, JUST. Dr. Zaid Barzinji, Executive Director, Maqasid Institute Global from USA, and Tuan Haji Muhammad Azmi Abdul Hamid, President, Malaysian Consultative Council of Islamic Organization, MAPIM. We are very indeed delighted again to have these three organizers to co-organize with us, with IAIS Malaysia, on this important forum. Ladies and gentlemen, the rise of US President Joe Biden is described by many as a historic moment for democracy and global human rights. Among the first executive orders signed by President Biden, hours after taking office, was the reversal of the Trump-era Muslim ban. Describing the policy as rooted in xenophobia and religious animus, Biden also repealed several policies on immigration deemed damaging and harmful. While these cornerstone actions forecast positive developments in terms of US foreign policies in the Middle East and on Muslim in general, the Biden administration remains to be tested on several imperative issues. Among them is the long overdue issue of Palestinian human rights, war and politics in the Gulf countries, Iran's nuclear situation, and the humanitarian crisis currently affecting millions in Yemen, Syria, Libya, and Iraq. The performance of President Biden and his administration in the upcoming months remain to be observed, especially on how it positioned itself amid Trump's controversial legacy in the Middle East and on US Muslim relations in general. As I have told you earlier, we have these three distinguished speakers. Prof. Dr. Chandra, how are you, Prof?
I'm all right, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. And how are you, Dr. Barzinji, all the way from US, from Nashville?
Thank you very much. I'm doing well.
Uh,
Appreciate the
so,
invitation.
so we have a very, different time zone here. Here at 11 a.m. on Thursday, and in Nashville it is 9 p.m. on Wednesday. So after this, we are going to have lunch, but for Dr. Bazar, they are going to bed. And Tuan Haji Azmi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much.
So
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. We can start with Prof. Dr. Chandra. So we have, it depends on how we, the discussion will take place. We will start with a question that we address to Prof. Dr. Chandra. In his first foreign policy address, President Biden announced that his administration is moving away from Trump's America First policy and declared that US diplomacy is making a comeback. What are your thoughts regarding its impact on current dynamics of global politics? Over to you, Prof. Chandra.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, salam.
Fellow panelists, greater, all those who are participating in this. I'd like to begin by thanking IAIS for this very kind invitation. This is an important topic. It may be a bit too early to discuss this topic because President Biden has just assumed office, and one should not judge a person before he has actually performed. But going on the basis of statements made and declarations, intentions announced, perhaps one could offer some thoughts, tentative thoughts, preliminary thoughts about his presidency in relation to Muslim countries. When President Biden stated publicly that the US is back, we are at the head of the table, we intend to lead again. He didn't elaborate, but for observers, it can lead to all sorts of interpretations. If by saying that you are back, intend to lead again. We're the head of the table, and we want others to recognize this. The question that one would ask is it going to be like what it was before? In other words, is it going to be like what it was for decades? Trump was, in some ways, the continuation of that sort of policy, except that he gave it a rougher, a harsher tone. It was a continuation of the same policy, which is basically the US seeking to maintain its dominant position. In other words, the US elite seeking to perpetuate its hegemony. This is what it's going to be. Because if you look at the US as a hegemonic power since the Second World War, it has not been a happy place. The world has not been a happy place. There have been wars, there's been a great deal of bloodshed, killings, people have been imprisoned, tortured, in relation to that hegemonic goal. Let's not forget, very quickly, there was Korea, and then Vietnam, and after that, of course, we had Iraq, Iraq 2, and Gulf War. We had, after that, the War on Terror, which was a massive attempt to control the Muslim world. Then, of course, we had, after that, various episodes related to the so-called Arab uprising in relation to Syria, Libya, Lebanon, and Yemen. As I stated a while ago, the impact has been disastrous. Millions dead. Millions dead. And of course, it includes some Americans and soldiers from the Allies, but basically it has been victims who suffered, who were targeted. Like in the case of Iraq, though we don't have accurate estimates, many sources tell us that at least 1 million people as a result of the 2003 occupation. It's a great tragedy. It's a great country which does not deserve this fate. And the situation continues to this day. So that's just one dimension, the political security dimension of hegemony. Hegemony has so many other dimensions. The economic dimension, dominance of the US dollar continues. Will it continue after Biden has begun to implement his economic policies? There's no reason to believe there will be any different. And control over international institutions, IMF, World Bank, WTO, that's going to continue. Huge gap between the rich and poor, the concentration of wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer people, which has been a phenomenon of our time. I think that will continue. What is it? About 600 billionaires. The wealth they have is more than the wealth of half of the human race. These are totally unacceptable conditions. That's the economy. If you look at culture, the dominance is also very obvious. It's continued for a very long while over information, entertainment, everything else that impacts upon the human mind. The impact upon various aspects of inter-ethnic relations, societal ties. It has been quite a disaster as a result of this topic. Islamophobia is a manifestation. Islamophobia is, of course, an ancient phenomenon, but nonetheless, it has become worse, and it's true that Trump made it much worse. And I don't think just by lifting the ban upon nationals from Muslim countries, the situation is going to change. You have to do many other things to change this. I still read about discrimination against Muslims in the United States and about the consequences of this long-standing phobia against Muslims, not just in the United States of America, but in other parts of the Western world and even the non-Western world, unfortunately, which is a consequence of Western obsession in a negative sense against Muslims. So that's the situation, Azam, that confronts us. So when you say you're going back, what does it mean? You're going to lead again. Is it going to lead to all this, or will there be a change? So the first point I want to make in this first round, I hope I have another round after this, if you don't mind, Brother Azam. The point I want to make is very simple. Going back, leading the world, means continuing with hegemonic politics and power, which is the pattern in the past and in the pattern under Donald Trump too. We don't want that. We don't welcome a United States which, in the name of joining the international community, seeks to dominate, control, and dictate.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Chandra. I think you gave a very good introduction. I think it's very difficult to say because Biden has just taken the seat as a president just a couple of weeks, and it is very difficult for us to predict, to foresee what's going to be his foreign policy on this. But I think you have give a very good point on that. I think we will come back to you, Prof. Chandra, for the second round, but perhaps we can continue with Dr. Barzinji on the first question for the first round. Dr. Barzinji, President Biden's rise to office is seen as political victory by many civil and human rights advocates. Additionally, Biden's executive order to repeal Trump's Muslim ban is seen as a positive development for the US Muslim community. Being a Muslim, and I'm doing as a Maqasid Institute Global that based in the US, can you share various reactions towards his presidency of by Americans in general and American Muslim in particular? Over to you, Dr. Barzinji.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. To, of course, the organizers, IAIS, and I really am grateful for this invitation. And I also would like just to say that I'm honored to be also in this panel with Professor Chandra Muzaffar as well as Haji Azmi. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I hope to share some useful insights into the American scene. In general, when we talk about what's happening in America, that is generally the aftermath of the 4-year presidency of Donald Trump, is that the country is much more divided than before, and this division continues to be the case. Now we need to remember during the presidency of Obama, we had a small faction called the Tea Party, and they created quite a bit of havoc. Now we're talking about 20 to 30% of the American population. They truly inhabit a different reality, and they have different set of facts, and they are extremely disenchanted with the election of Joe Biden, and the situation as of now that there is a strong division continues to exist in the country, and it will be a big challenge for American democracy to rise over it. On the other hand, we still have the majority of American citizens who voted Biden into office have a big sigh of relief, and that we are returning to sanity and to normalcy and decency, and that now some work can start to repair the damage and protect the liberal progressive agenda, and maybe build on some of the doors that Trump opened, and that enables actually and empowers the liberal agenda in America. That's in general. When it comes to you, American Muslims, obviously we are in a different situation today than a few years ago, an even different situation than during the presidency of Obama. In one way is that Americans, Muslims have much stronger presence in the current government than previously, and we had a much stronger role in running the campaigns of the different Democratic presidential candidates, like with Bernie Sanders, for example, and then Joe Biden as well. So that means that we are a lot more involved in the process, and that is key. The issue is not that we have demands and we are being heard or not. You have to be part of the process. And as such, when you look at what is it, how do American Muslims look at this the new administration, and what can happen to the future of Muslim Americans in this country? Well, the issue is not like we sit down and make demands, but to be participants in the game. And we have three strategic themes that we need to work on. The first strategic theme is that we need to really focus on focus on the effort to join hands over the common issues, and not think of ourselves as this is we only care about Muslim harassment or Muslim discrimination, but think about the general theme and focus on that and what is our maqsid or higher objective here. For example, we care about human dignity, and whoever human is being abused, whether white or black or American, Muslim or non-Muslim, whatever abuse happen and whenever there's an attack on human dignity, we stand against that. So and indirectly, we are really part of the bigger American society. So that affects us. So when we stand with the Black Lives Matter movement, yes, we are standing with the 25% of American Muslims who are African Americans, as well as everybody who is being abused disproportionately. When we stand with some aspects of the Me Too movement, then we are also standing with many American Muslims who are abused sometimes in the Masajid in our Islamic organization and not given proper voice and role, or continue to be marginalized. So that we one strategic contribution that we need to make, that we are part of the general population, and we fight for common issues rather than only narrow-focused American Muslim issues. The next one is that we need to contribute moral and intellectual leadership on current issues, like I said, like race relations, police brutality, homegrown terrorism. These are all very important issues that we actually have insights on how we promote moderation, how do we operationalize peace and justice in the society and equity on such matters. So we have an important moral and intellectual message that we have to be to contribute to be part of that level of the conversation. The third theme of the strategy that I would like to that Muslims are currently involved in is to be part of the solution. We're not always at the table because we are being harmed and we are crying for help, or we created a mess and we need help solving it. No, actually, we are currently part of the solution, and we need to make that very clear and recognizable, and which is happening under the current administration more clearly. And for example, here we have the largest number of Muslim officials in the government, which is extremely important. And we want to fight for issues like poverty eradication or amelioration, by maybe advocating universal basic income, healthcare, universal healthcare, because it's a right to life, and equitable education because it's key for future empowerment. So I would say this is generally the three themes that American Muslims are working hard to establish to become equal partners, respectable partners, and honored partners who actually are contributing clearly, contributing to the American dream and American ideals, and being recognized for their contribution.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Barzinji. I think you have made a very important actually three strategic themes that I think Muslims can take part. I think we hope that this new president, President Biden, by having this participating by Muslims, the American Muslim under these three themes will give some impetus to development of the Muslim community in the States. I have a few questions on this, but I think we will reserve it until the end of the discussion on this matter pertaining involving the American Muslims in the US. But Dr. Haji Azmi, can we go to you? Tuan Haji Azmi, as a Muslim NGO perspective, Tuan Haji, based on your experience in interacting and working with a vast network of Muslim NGOs in Malaysia and overseas as well, what are the immediate hopes or concerns of Muslim communities for Biden's administration, especially in contrast to the previous administration?
Right. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Dr. Azam, my respected brothers, Dr. Chandra and Dr. Barzinji. This is an opportunity, and thank you for having me in this conversation. Now, if I were to respond to that question, I would like to backtrack a little bit of the legacy of foreign policies of the US towards the Muslim world. We know very well that there is no single foreign policy towards Muslim world by the US. If you looked at the during the Cold War, the US are strategically choosing Muslim countries in different ways of their views and their perspective. For instance, they were trying to contain the Russian Soviet Union of Russia against world around, especially the Muslim countries. They have a selective kind of policies. They were supportive of the Islamic movement, in certain countries, and then they were against certain regimes in other countries. So if you look at the Cold War era, the US foreign policies towards the Muslim world is in a way to contain communism and to also, to make sure that the influence of Russia will not be overwhelmed to the Muslim countries. Okay. But then you see instances of the widespread of military presence of the US around the world. They've got military bases in so many countries just to make sure that their presence is going to influence any interaction between countries with Russia and making sure that the interest of America is always been safeguarded. Now, if you look at the post-Cold War, then the same kind of pattern of policy, foreign policies is being applied. Before they were supportive of Shah of Iran, and now they are against Iran because of this revolution in 1979. And then they were supportive of Afghanistan Islamic movement. And now they are against, in a way, they are against the Taliban. They want to get rid of Taliban, although they are engaging with Taliban now as a mediator. But if you look at this kind of what we call trend of policy patterns, then you see that there is a diversity of foreign policies depending on how the US looks at their interests. You know, uh, look at the influence of US on the Middle East. Um, at least there are 3 points of consideration. One of is of course the oil. They really wanted to look at the interest of access to oil in the Middle East. That would be the first consideration. Number two, towards the Middle East, also the geographic location of the Middle East, which is very strategic. So that is why they are very, very focused on their policies on Middle East because of the location. Number three, of course, the interest of Israel will be one of the agenda that they will always be keen to see what are the policies towards the Muslim nations in the Middle East. At least I would track two kind of policies towards the Muslim world after the fall of the Union Soviet Union. One is what they call the new isolationist policy, meaning that there is no more threat. We have to concentrate on domestic affairs. We have strengthened the US. We have to cut down our cost operation. So that is one view of the administration during that time. Another the opinion is going what they call having a grand strategy and an enlargement strategy, meaning that they say because of this they fall back on the Huntington's clash of civilization theory, and they start to say that now we have a new enemy, a new threat, and the new threat is political Islam. They say there is a fundamentalism of Islam. There is this militant Islam, and this will be a threat to the Western society and the Western capitalism. Now, some of them have even gone to say this is not only a new enemy. They say that this is a necessary enemy because US wants to sustain its defense industry. You have to create an enemy. So with that framework, I would then see that when I was working a lot with many friends around the world and looking at the policy of US, I think it's very critical for us to always have this, historical perspective of the policies before, and then we can see the light of the Biden's administration. Now, the Biden's administration is probably a continuity of the general policy of America. I mean, putting aside Donald Trump, he's been seen as a racist, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant demagogue. That has been the image of Donald Trump. So the whole relations of US with the Muslim world has been very soft in that sense, very sour. But then if you look before that, Obama, for instance, and that time the vice president was Biden himself. They made some initiative which sort of depart from Bush. Bush had an experience that, in fact, the Muslims in America were in 2000 presidential election. They chose Bush, the Republicans. And then because of September 11, and there was this pronouncement of Bush that Islam is terrorism, Islam is bad, Islam is agents of evil, whatnot. Then the shift of the Muslims came back to the Democrats. Obama came with this so-called an engagement policy. So this so-called famous Cairo speech sort of defined a new way of looking how US should relate with the Muslim world. So he goes back to saying that the Muslims are not against values of America; they're only against the policies. And Muslim are generally, they are very peaceful people. They very concerned about their basic things that they should have. And therefore, there is a need for us to engage. There is a need for us to actually interact with them with a more constructive way. So talking about basic human rights, talking about, economics, talking about education, talking about, living harmoniously. So he's putting that kind of narrative as a, way to interact with the Muslim world. But again, when you look at the real ground situation, it is so different because the speech was left as a speech. There was really no serious things that the Obama administration did. So wars was there. Guantanamo they didn't close down Guantanamo. The atrocities of the Americans in Iraq, and also they start showing that they are not backing out of all these things that they've done. They have been working with some regimes in the Middle East and trying to prolong this. As far as the Israeli interest is well gathered, then they are doing the same thing. So Obama has a kind of a very it's more of a rhetoric than real serious things that they want to improve on the relations between U.S. and Muslim world. Now, when we have this situation of Biden taking on, when he was the vice president of Obama, those ideas now needs to be really translated. Now, as Dr. Azam was saying, just hours after the inauguration, we had the executive orders. Nothing was done really at really the foreign affairs policies. So it's about lifting the ban on Muslims to come to US. That's about all. He didn't touch on that. But a few days, probably a week ago, he did have a very specific speech on foreign policies. If you go down there, as Dr. Chandra said, he made that statement of America is back. And he really, stress on that. It's back. But as Dr. Chandra was saying, what does that mean? Does it mean that America is back to their old ways of dealing with the Muslims in the Muslim world? Or is it another meaning? He was not dwelling much on it. He was just talking about China as a rival. He was talking about Iran on the non-proliferation agreement, but he didn't touch anything on Palestine. And then he says he will still safeguard the sovereignty of Saudis. It's about that. Meaning, if you look at all the terms that he was using, the language, it's almost like there won't be that much of a difference, Trump looks very clear. I mean, he's making these moves. He's not only talking, he's making real moves. He's justifying Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel. He gave up this Golan Heights to Israel. I mean, he moved very concrete moves. And therefore, Biden has to undo this. Is going to be difficult because Biden has got a vice president who's also very pro-Israel. His whole cabinet is almost like being defined as Jews, and therefore the Jews lobby will be very strong on him. And I think that will also define what he's going to do with the policy. Now, my end, the first round, I would anticipate that the Muslim world has to be very very intelligent, very smart in dealing with Biden, because the way that he's already announced certain policies that I see that it's not going to be much different. Dr. Chandra is also saying that we wouldn't expect any significant changes as far as policy is concerned. And therefore, the Muslim world and the Muslims in America has to be very diligent and very cautious in how to deal with them. We need to participate. We need to engage. There's a lot of good groups in America among the civil societies. MAPIM is engaged with quite a number. And I was trying to contact Ilhan Omar and ICF. These are the people, Muslims but still, their thoughts on the Muslim world is not really clear on that. But we have to engage with them. My final word is that I think with Biden's administration, we have to send him our message. Dr. Chandra probably we sit down and try to write a message to Biden, and this is our Muslim thoughts, and we let him read. We want his response. OIC is not really functioning well, but therefore we have the civil society to start our own initiative, engaging with him if there's any way that we can influence him. But at least he has to take notes. We are watching him. We are looking at his policy. We are looking at the ground realities. We are going to do a check reality all the time with the US. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tuan Azmi. I think you have given very insight information what happened with this U.S. foreign policy. Pre-Cold War, post-Cold War, and then back to when Biden was a VP, Vice President. And I think like what Prof. Chandra said, that I think we cannot anticipate that this Biden's foreign policy will be something new, which I think from the history of the previous president, except you mentioned Tuan Haji Azmi, Trump is a different character. So I think very interesting indeed your points on Haji Azmi. Maybe the other panelists can pick up and can also add some more of this point. Okay, Prof. Chandra, can we go back to you for the second round? Okay, do you think maybe some of these points have been mentioned? Do you think Biden's attempt to restore order and global faith to the US will be successful? And what would be the necessary step for this to happen?
Thank you, Azam. Let me begin by endorsing all that has been said by my co-panelists. I agree with them. They brought new dimensions into our discussion. And Haji Azmi and I are on the same page on many of these vital issues that challenge us, and not just the Muslims, but others who are part of the global South, and perhaps those who are also part of the global North, who are victims of this dominance and hegemony. And that, in fact, brings me to what I would like to put across in the second round, a singular point that we would like to put across. Is an alternative available for President Joe Biden? Theoretically, there is an alternative. But whether that will be translated into reality, that is the big question. What do I mean by an alternative? A theoretical alternative which is available. I think this is the right time, historically speaking, to work towards multilateralism. Forget restoring glory or power to the US. Forget about the unipolar world that the US is so used to, its people are so used to, this politics of exceptionalism so used to. We are an exception, we're different, which unfortunately also rooted in a distorted view of Christian theology, this notion of exceptionalism. I think they have to get rid of that and sincerely commit themselves to multilateralism. That is a possibility because it can be done. Many other nations are ready for it. Why do I say this? You take something the US also participated in, the Paris Agreement on climate change. That is an example of multilateralism. All the countries came together. Civil society groups, as we know, played a very big role in pushing the agenda in that direction. Of course, under Trump, the US withdrew, but now the US has indicated that it will return to the Paris Agreement. That's multilateralism. But I think there are other areas where if you can demonstrate that you have a commitment beyond what is perceived as the US interests, narrowly defined, go beyond that narrow definition of the US's interests, very often conditioned by powerful lobbies and interest groups and so on. Go beyond that, then I think people will be convinced that you are moving in another direction, that you're really interested in humanity as a whole. As an example, something that can be done, or hopes to be done, it would be willingness to return without conditions to the nuclear deal, the Iran nuclear deal. Don't try to use it to force Iran to give up its missiles, because it's just not fair. We know what Iran's military budget is compared to the military budget of its neighbors, including Israel, of course. Iran is not a military power from their point of view. And it is not Iran that broke that agreement. That agreement was broken by the US. So the right thing to do is for the US to restore. It is multilateral. There are 6 powers involved, including Iran. There are 7 of them. And it is, in many ways, a workable, a feasible agreement. There's shortcomings, but it is something that is worth implementing. Good for the whole of West Asia, and it'll be good for the rest of humanity. This is what I mean by demonstrations of this sort. This is what we want to see from the Biden administration. Concrete, real examples of willingness to work with others in the larger interest. That's the essence of multilateralism. Not just pursuing this very sort of jaundiced notion of the US's position in the world. That has to change. And given Biden's support, it's overwhelming, 81 million votes. And given, I suppose, the current mood, I don't think the American public as a whole, I'm sure Dr. Zaid knows this much better, they are interested in dominance and control. If you look at opinion polls and the general attitudes within the US on war, going to war, and pursuing aggressive policies, there is, I think, a change that has taken place. So this is the time to pursue this, genuine multilateralism. Your so-called rivals in the international stage, they're committed to multilateralism. Put them to the test. Show whether they're really committed or not. Get them to prove their credentials. China has openly committed itself to multilateralism. So has Russia. All other countries are committed to multilateralism. If you look at Iran's plan for peace in West Asia, it is a multilateral endeavor, where you recognize the rights of one another, but at the same time, you have a collective purpose. In other words, the other actors are ready for multilateralism. Is the US ready? That, I think, is the real question. Not just in terms of rhetoric, but even rhetoric, the US has not committed itself to multilateralism. You look at the language of US leaders, including past leaders of Obama, there's no commitment to multilateralism. When you talked about the TPP, Obama, there's not a commitment to multilateralism. And if you look at the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Pact, which failed, it was an attempt to impose the US will on something very, very important, on the whole question of dispute settlement. But it's a good thing that the thing failed. Now, of course, there is another endeavor of this sort, but if you look at the regional efforts that are emerging, including RCEP, which I think has some promise, the US is not part of it. And if you look at other regional developments that one is monitoring closely. Africa, 53 nation states, it's making some progress. I think the US should be in step with this multilateral efforts rather than continue to devote itself to exceptionalism, to dominance, to power, to control, even if it's done more subtly now compared to Trump years. That's not the way to go. Multilateralism is what we're looking for, especially those of us with small countries like Malaysia. We played a role of sorts on the international stage. We should play a more active role in the future. But for countries like us, I think multilateralism is the way forward. We would like the United States to join all of us. If you look at some important votes in the UN, the United States has always been alone, together with Israel. The best example would be the Cuba vote. Year in and year out, overwhelmingly, the nations of the world support Cuba. Who are those who oppose Cuba? This is what I mean by multilateralism. It's an example of multilateralism at the UN, support for Cuba. Those who oppose, invariably, the United States and Israel. Once in a while, they bring in the Marshall Islands and small states. Basically, it is the US and Israel that stand apart from the others. Let us try to persuade them to change. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Chandra. I think you are proposing that US has to work towards multilaterals, and I think it has to be, I mean, their willingness to work together with others and not only persuading. And I think, including what you mentioned with the rivals of the US, for example, China and Russia, I think that would be something that you have mentioned certain points on that. Continue with the other question with Dr. Barzinji. As sorry, as an American Muslim, what policy shifts by the new administration that you would look forward to in terms of improving US Muslim relations, both domestically and abroad? Dr. Barzinji, please.
Yes. So the approach I would like to take to this, and in a sense, I want to build on what Professor Chandra has mentioned. I would like, and also definitely what our dear Tuan Haji Azmi mentioned, is to start by we really have to approach this strategic relationship with the US and the US role and what we want the US to shift on. I mean, all that is very much debatable at many levels. So there are I would like to start by stating 5 points that are important for us as a global Muslim to think through to effect a worldview change. Starting with the oneness of creation. If we can get over this us versus them, Muslim versus others, Muslims are everywhere in the world. Every single country in the world has Muslims. So we are everywhere. So there's no us versus them. And there is just really this one creation of Allah. And then this exclusive thinking always puts us in a corner. And if we can get over that, then and then we have the other sub point here that we have more in common than anybody thinks, even when it comes to when you think about policies with U.S. policies. Sometimes we have more in common. So the issue is not just we want the U.S. to do something for us. It is something we want the U.S. to do something for its own sake and for the sake of the world. So it's not like we're asking for favors and or protection or this or that. It is for everybody's benefit. So that is one thing that we need to change in our mindset, or at least I would like to advocate this change. The second thing that crises are opportunities from an even basic Islamic understanding. فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. And here, Trump simply put naked the U.S. foreign policy. We don't care about anything in the Middle East except the oil, and if you want more protection, you pay for it. It just came out and bluntly stated it. So if anybody was delusional about what is going on there, now it's no longer, there's no longer this delusion. Trump went ahead and put the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem to signal clearly to everybody who is awake that uh, America, when it comes to the Palestinian issue, is not it's not an unbiased, it's not an even-handed partner. Yet we always run to America for a solution. We have to stop that. I mean, that is kind of a crisis, but it helps us to understand that give up hope on this. We have to change tack. But here also crisis and our opportunities are also that we are always come to it with a victim mindset, which is really paralyzes us instead of now we are here, we want to have solutions. And then we need to approach it with pragmatism. We know from our history from the earliest days, we don't always solve our problems with dua, but we combine dua with digging a khandaq, or a ditch, and other kind of practical approaches to these problems that we might face. And then we really need to think about the national interest and what is the interest of all the partners that we interact with throughout the world, and what are the incentive patterns. So if we understand, and every when it comes to the U.S., every administration that comes with national priorities and international policies, there are opportunities. For example, the U.S. Position vis-a-vis China. Basically, we are openly in what I call Cold War, or cold competitiveness, or cold conflict with China. And there is a new competition over the world order between the US Western model and the Chinese model. And there's a lot of people who are fascinated by the Chinese model. So it is not simply theoretical. It's actually now it's a major force on the international arena. Yet also China is conducting the biggest, actively conducting the biggest genocide of Muslims than any other country or anywhere else. Second to that comes to what's happening in India, and then comes the other crises that we have in the Middle East and elsewhere. So Trump using that China's abuses for human rights is an opening. It's within the crisis that Trump caused at the world stage. There are opportunities. So if we capitalize on these opportunities, we can always be trying to solve problems and not sit down and feeling victimized and paralyzed. And the third is that we need to seek to first to understand. So, for example, who are the others that we want them to stand by us or stand for good causes, and what do they want? And then, as well as who are we and what do we stand for as Muslims? And that is a big challenge, because we are talking about 1.8 billion Muslims. We are talking about 50 Muslim majority countries, and sometimes these Muslim countries have more in common with their neighbors who are maybe non-majority Muslim countries than with another Muslim country across the globe or across a different continent. So we really need to understand the world around us, and what are what move other people, what are the misconceptions they have uh, of Muslims, and why are we able to communicate ourselves clearly and what we stand for. And many times the world is confused about what we want. I mean, the U.S., for example, we take the U.S. Foreign policy makers are confused. I mean, what exactly are you want the U.S. to do in Syria? What exactly you want us to do in for the Rohingya, when the Muslim countries around the world don't care, do not support, when Muslim countries actually support Chinese policies for controlling Rohingya. And it seems we are sending at the Muslim world, we send very confused signals. So you cannot really blame a superpower that has its own set of interest and national interest to promote. We cannot blame them when they come and they bring their own policies and they're destructive. Sometimes that do not really destructive policies that do not match what the people in reality on the ground need. The fourth point is multilateralism is key, but here I want to also put it differently that the U.S. needs to approach its world and global agenda through multilateralism. And I think we'll see definitely a return to that with the current administration. On the other hand, Muslims need to approach the challenges that we want to solve through multilateralism that does not depend on the U.S. If the U.S. joins, that is great, but it is not dependent on everything on the US acceptance or approval. Actually, when the US got out of the picture, that gave some breathing space for other regional actors to step up and try to play a more active role. And the fifth point is that we really need to lead and to dream and to imagine a better world. And if we do that, then we don't allow just the existing set of logical cause and effect to affect us, but because we dream, we break barriers, we overcome the challenges that we have. Now, with regard to and then I want to move on to three strategic themes for the shift and of how we interact with the U.S. One is that we want to, it will be, we can be a lot more effective, even in dealing with the United States and helping the United States shift its policies if we are worked through regional, transnational, and global coalitions to address, for example, global issues like we are all the children of Adam coalition. So if there is a human right abuses anywhere in the world, then that is something that we cannot stand for. And when a country like Malaysia build alliance with a country like Mali and another country in Europe and elsewhere, we are all stronger. In this way, and we are more influential when it comes to communicating with the State Department, U.S. State Department, and U.S. Government, and demanding a shift in policies. So the other one that I would like to touch on the global moral and intellectual leadership. So we need to talk the talk here. I would say U.S. rejoining international organizations and agreement, that is great. We need to contribute to that. And we need to inspire holistic rethinking of global crises like the environmental protection by promoting the halal and tayyib. We are not only just focused on a fiqhi definition of what is halal, but what is the tayyib, what is the tazkiyah, what is the purification. When we think the Prophet teaches us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the earth is a masjid and tahur. All of earth is sacred like a masjid and a tahur and a pure place. How are we treating earth as a masjid and a tahur? So that will be something that there is a huge opportunity for Muslims to contribute that level of intellectual and moral leadership. The last point here, the last strategic theme is that walking the walk, and here be again part of the solution. Light candles rather than condemn the darkness. So we need to advocate regional and global fair standards and fair treatments of labor, of the environment, and all kind of children. And we need to promote joining and volunteering, not only for local organizations, but for international organizations. Are we present at the UN? Are we present at the subcommittees at the UN? Wherever there is a volunteer opportunity, are we present at Human Rights Watch? Are we present at any kind of environmental organizations? Because at the end of the day, if we are not at the table, we are on the menu. Thank you.
Dr. Barzinji, quite a number of important points, and you have raised these 5 important points. But I think one of the points that you raised is the wonders of creation. I think that would be something that can unite Muslim and the others. I think that would be, if we go back to the religion of Islam and also to other religions as well, I think Prophet Adam, our great grandfather, would be the one person that we can face, and then we can say that we are from the same great grandfather. And I think the three such themes that you mentioned, I think one of the things that you mentioned that is, rather than what would be the other party can contribute, what would be the other party's policy, we as Muslim, we need to work together and to contribute, to participate in whatever platforms for the benefit of not only for Muslims but for everyone. I think that is a very good important point, Dr. Zaid. Now we move to Tuan Haji Azmi for the last question for the second round. In your opinion, Tuan Haji Azmi, what would be the best course of action by Biden to improve the standing of US in the eyes of Muslim communities worldwide? Tuan Haji Azmi, please.
Yeah, thank you. He has to be he has to show the honesty of any significant shift, as Dr. Chandra was saying, you have to prove it on the ground. If we were to say that multilateralism is the answer, would he really, put it as an executive order in some ways, or he has to translate that into certain policies, pronouncement, and then make sure that it is actually implemented. So I think that would be a real move that we can then have hope on the US policies. But I like your point, Dr. Azam. We have to put our house in order. The Muslim countries are in a very, I cannot describe in a way. I'm not saying that I'm, looking at the hopeless situation. There is a lot of things that we can actually do to rectify our problems from within. We cannot deny that we have a problem of leadership. We have a problem of sectarianism. We have a problem of everybody is defining our ummah from within borders. We have not crossed out of that. If I go to a Muslim country outside of Malaysia, I don't feel at home. There is somehow rather a strange feeling. People are really very concerned of their sovereignty and their interests. And then we have our brothers coming from problematic areas like the Rohingyas and the Syrians, the Palestinians, even from the Kachin community from Burma, even from many countries. We don't seem to expound or show our humanistic feeling towards people. So we have to show that within the Muslim countries that we are all humane, we are ever ready to help. We may have some rulings or whatnot, but that openness, that feeling of let people feel at home in the Muslim countries, that should be really be organized well. And then we have also the our what do you call our role of our scholars in our ulamas. The division seems to source from this. When the intellectuals and don't seem to speak the same language, then you would see the expression of our message to the non-Muslim world is kind of a strange thing. It's not happening in your own world, and you're talking about us trying to do something for the Muslim world. The answer to your question, Dr. Azam, on the what do we expect from Biden, and what can we sort of send a message. As I said this now, he has to be very he has to show the honesty of dealing with the Muslims and not being dictated by an agenda that we are always aware of this, and he must be aware of it. The agenda of the Zionism agenda is very strong in the White House and the Capitol Hill, and that is why if he cannot delink from this, he cannot then see that the Muslims should become a partner rather than just a subject. And so I think he has to show that. He has to be firm. We are always like every day, watching and reading what's happening in Jerusalem, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Syria, and whatnot. And this thing has to be undone with all the policies, with certain regimes, and really devastating Yemen and Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. So they are taking down one country after another. They're using the weapons of the Americans everywhere. So it's very difficult for people not to be cautious about policies of America. We do have a right to be very cautious. And so our message to Biden is that now is the time for him to, number one, probably, as Dr. Chandra was saying, this multilateralism should be translated. Again, the challenges are there because US is still dominant in the economy, and it's also in its military power. And then the sense of nationalism is also very strong now in many countries. So that's a challenge for this multilateral thing that what we call US will embrace. The US has withdrawn from so many multilateral agreements, from the Kyoto agreement, from the ban the missiles, from everything. So, even WHO, now they are going to come back to WHO. They have defunded UNRWA. All these are signals that's very bad for US to really see that, okay, now we're going to do a significant changes. It will take time. There will be lobbying from the IPAC of the Jews in the Congress. It has to be, really, it has to be very serious, very firm. My last word on this expectation of Biden is, of course, Malaysia, as a small country, as we know very well, we are part of probably 1.8 billion. US has to acknowledge that our population, the Muslim population, is getting bigger, but it's also getting younger. Something like probably 1/3 of the Muslim population around the world are below 24 years old. That statistic is very significant. If you fail to talk, to have a generational dialogue between the US or the Western powers with the Muslim young people, and to come up with very honestly about how we can develop a new world, a peaceful world, then I think that will not augur well if there's no confidence between the young Muslim population of the world, that they are quite much more exposed to many debates, and they are trying to give their own thoughts towards it. So I think this interaction with US, with the young Muslim people, is very important for the policy that we will come up with. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Haji Azmi. I think if I can just repeat your two important points that you have mentioned just now, Tuan Azmi. And I think what is important is the role of the Muslim scholars, the Muslim ulama, to have to speak at the same language. I think it is very important when it comes to issue that you raise, in particular when we talk about in a broader manner, include the importance of the Muslims in the global stand, for example. And I think you mentioned at your towards the end of your presentation on how this despite Malaysia as a very small country, but we contribute to this 1.8 billion Muslim population on this earth, and 3/4 of them are young generations, young Muslims, and they really wants to see what's this policy and what will be benefit to them. So that will be something I think that we can say from your points. Okay, we have several questions from the viewers from the FB. Perhaps I can pick up, I think, one or two first. Okay, I think I open to all the panelists to respond. So we have one question from Andrew Koo. The United States has consistently refused to join the International Criminal Court or ICC, regardless of which party is in power. Now that the ICC has ruled it has jurisdiction over the Palestinian issue, was it a mistake for Malaysian government to withdraw its accession? And despite whatever position the Biden administration takes, should Malaysia join the ICC? So any panelists can respond to this question by Andrew Koo? Prof. Chandra, perhaps?
Brother Azam, yes. Yeah. Well, I think the ICC is in some respects like the UN. The UN is international, but it's flawed because it has got 5 permanent veto-wielding members, but we are still part of the UN. And in many other respects, the UN has failed us. The ICC has not given us hope in certain areas, and I think it is true, as some of the African NGOs have stated openly, the ICC seems to be targeting African leaders. They seem to be a little soft when it comes to some others. So the ICC has dragged its feet on certain other issues, though I think now they have been put to the test on Israel. So the ICC, in that sense, you cannot expect it to be any different from what it is. By staying out, you're not going to change the situation. Like in the case of the UN, I think it's better to be in there as part of this multinational effort and try to bring about some changes, and at least ensure that there's a certain degree of justice. So in that sense, I think, yes, Malaysia should have gone into the ICC.
I share the view that yes, there are some policies that Malaysia has always been, civil society has asked the government to really consider. For instance, even our protocol on refugees, we are not a signatory. We got some consideration, and now we are not also a member of the ICC and the Rome Statute. Therefore, we are a bit like, we can just ignore, which is not right. The recent ICC decision on the Prof of war crimes by Israel, we should be part of a very strong support to this decision and not allowing that the US is now, even Biden's administration has given an opinion. They are very concerned about this. So that's why, as Dr. Chandra was saying, on certain nations, it looks very firm. But when it comes to some nations and all that, then all of a sudden even Biden administration jump into it and saying that they are not agreeable with this issue. And therefore, I think ICC is a very important platform that also will give us this opportunity to also reflect on our things of our own governance, when it comes to international relations, so that we are always when we want to give an opinion or any proposal, people are not just then asking us back, look at your country, it's not doing any better. So I think if we always been told you do not have the moral high ground to talk about human rights, that you have got a problem in your country. So I think we have to sort of come into board, and then we can give our opinions. If there's a review of some policies or things like that on this platform, we can do it because we are equal partners. So I mean, that's my opinion on this.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Zaid, as an outsider, you're non-Malaysian, you're American Muslims in the States. What do you think about the position that I think should Malaysia join ICC?
We need to understand the game and how it works, and how we can the issue is not simply just joining. It is understanding how this organization works and for what purpose are we joining. So from that perspective, that if there is a clear advantage, it's really kind of then probably that should be the right decision to go ahead and join that ICC. Uh, from American perspective, joining the ICC or not, it is this is something. If an organization is not clearly under U.S. control, then the U.S. is looks very suspiciously at it, and there is a very strong. I mean, again, the thing in the U.S. Approaching such decisions involves a very hard and contentious debate and fight in the Congress. And when you go to the Congress, uh, President Biden or any other president needs to pick up his or her battles. So unless there is a very strong incentive to join the ICC, uh, Biden or Obama or let's say those who would be kind of might be inclined to support this will not do it because they will lose lots of political capital and time and effort fighting this goal when they have a different priorities. So then, how do you raise the priority to a high enough level to make it worthwhile for US to pay attention to the ICC and and commit to it? So that would be uh, the way that maybe if we work through multilateral institutions to show that it is in the best interest of the United States to advocate for joining the ICC. Right now, we're talking about a whole different level. We're talking about we're barely trying to get the U.S. back into WHO and other basic organizations. So we have taken 3, 4, 5 steps behind and now we have to really reclaim these other battles before even arriving at the ICC.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Barzanji. There's one question from Tengku Iskandar. With Biden's advanced age, we know that, Biden is one of the, perhaps the oldest president. I think, I'm not very sure in the history of the president.
Yes, he is. Yes.
The history of the president of US is the oldest. Perhaps there is a 50% chance that Kamala will be replacing him as president before the end of the presidential term. What consequence to U.S. policies and the Kamala presidency, even if short? Any panelists can respond to that.
So, Barzinji, that's your subject. You know how to stay in power with his age. We have got a 95 years prime minister who's still trying to get into office.
There you go. Some people really are political animals. I mean, this is where they thrive on that game. But generally, Kamala was chosen for this role because she is conventional. She is very conventional. She is law and order. She is. I mean, she's really. It's hard to say what is very different in her policies. That is, and that is really like she's not a Bernie Sanders that will just really have a different approach to things. No, she is. So she will be just a continuation of the current approach. Would her status as a minority change? See, the thing is that sometimes when you come from a minority, sometimes you work harder to be accepted by the majority. So you want to be like whiter than the white, but still on the margin, you try to you still stand as a symbol of, well, you can be a person of color and you can continue to influence and to have important role in decision making.
Okay, thank you. I think we have one comment here, but I think Prof. Chandra, Dr. Zaid, as well as Dr. Azmi has been sharing the, but just for the sake of our viewers, and this Kasturi Hang also shared this view on this issue. On this U.S. foreign policy is not merely an act of a president, but a mixture of bureaucratic, Senates, public opinion, media, Jewish lobby, we have been mentioning that, elite business groups and other pressure groups. I think that is clearly right. I think with this, it's not
Correct.
the one-man show. There are people behind the scenes,
Absolutely.
quite a number of them. Okay, we have one question from Abu Bakar Hamza. Was the fall of Trump and Biden's victory would somehow represent the decline of political populism trend, or will it create a spill over effects to global politics? Anyone of the panelists?
I just chip in as probably my last words on this. I mean, that's a very critical question. I mean, the fall of Trump, we have to really underscore, what were the factors. I mean, with that 74 million US still voting for him, it strikes a signal to us. I mean, there's a massive this ideology of Trump that presented from whatever he did, the white supremacists, from systemic abuse of the blacks and whatnot, went into this insurrection of the Capitol Hill, is now under impeachment. And then I was just looking at a few of the comments from the Congress people who are now in that trial. It really amazes me. Even some of the Republicans are still saying that he's the best person, for America. That means there's a long haul for us to, while we say that Trump has been defeated, but then he's not been defeated at the popular level. Like such, 74 million is not a small number. So that it can be translated in many. I think he will make his own way, although the impeachment will then disqualify him for any public office. But still, the challenge is very great in US. Once Biden sort of formulate things from within domestically, which he said in his speech for foreign policies, he's saying that whatever we decide domestically, that will also be affected in at the international level. That's how we trying to connect. He's going to do some so-called healing of the Americans by doing making certain decisions, and therefore that will reflect a little bit of what he will do with the other world. So I think my view is that populism of America from this uh, bipartisan of two groups is going to stay. There will be, a way why the Americans are still having that thoughts being formulated by Donald Trump. They are still onto that. They are latching onto that. I think that will be a great challenge for America to make any shift, very significant shift. But the fact that America is in a very critical situation. I mean, the COVID-19 is it's the highest, and they are really struggling to come out of that. And I think, and on that part again, their huge commitment with their to regenerate the economy is going to be very tough. And therefore, I think that the foreign policy is going to be a bit soft in some ways towards others, but I think the principles of what they have already, established will carry on. We cannot have a really high hope of an immediate change by the foreign policy of Biden.
Okay, thank you. Any more response from the panelists?
Yes,
Prof. Chandra, please.
Brother Azam, yeah. To me, the results of the US presidential elections, they provide hope, and yet they also generate despair. Why? They provide hope and yet generate despair. Hope because there was mass participation, and there's no doubt at all that people who came out to express their views and so on, and especially certain segments of the minorities, they were very vocal in terms of participation in the process, which is good. It gives hope as far as the democratic process is concerned. But it fills me with despair. Fills me with despair. Why? For two reasons. You see, the major domestic issue that emerged within the electoral process was actually the question of the blacks. The Black Lives Matter movement, which was drawn into the campaign. There may have been other motives behind it and all the rest of it. But if you look at that issue, it is a very, very important issue because it impinges upon the color dimension of politics. It impinges upon slavery as part of America's past. It impinges upon the sufferings of a huge segment of the population. And one would have thought that there would be some attempt to address the root causes of this challenge within the new scenario or the post-election scenario. I don't see any signs yet that this is going to happen. It is just happening at the level of appointing certain individuals, positions here and there. Just like in the case of the indigenous people, they are thinking of appointing an indigenous woman as the Minister of Interior, which is a good thing. But that is not the solution. These are just appointments at that level. Real solutions will deal with structures, it will deal with fundamental relationships between classes and groups. It has to deal with the whole question of underlying values, attitudes, and so on. I don't see any sign that these things are going to be done. It may be done, I don't know. Let's hope it will be done. I don't see any signs. And given that politics is so divided, and that division is in a sense become institutionalized within the party system in the US, I have a feeling that for the next few years, the US leadership would be engrossed in this question of a divided nation along these lines, but not dealing with some of the underlying causes of major challenges like the situation of blacks. And to that, I would like to add, as yet another point. I was just amazed how this nation, which has played such a dominant role in global politics, has so craftily managed to exclude international relations from its domestic debate. So there was an attempt to bring this to the fore by people like Cornel West and so on, that you cannot, he argued very eloquently, you cannot separate what is happening domestically in the United States of America from its global role, its dominance, its hegemony, and how it is impacted on people. But the whole question of the United States, its military bases, its spending on arms, that, if you look at the amount of money that is spent on arms compared to all the other countries, the 10, 12 competitors that come after the US, it is something that the American public should be concerned about. But somehow this issue was never the focus. So this, to my mind, is quite disturbing. You go through the motions of a democracy, but what is most fundamental, it doesn't emerge. It doesn't emerge in the debate and the discussion and so on. And they manage to very cleverly sort of exclude issues like that. And this has happened in the past too, a number of times in the past. In spite of the Vietnam War, a couple of presidential elections, was Vietnam important in that sense? Of course, it did make some impact upon the electoral process, but nonetheless, not important in the sense of looking at basic US foreign policy, which is why even after Vietnam, they could go into another adventure like in Iraq, because there's been no real sort of attempt to examine the US's role in the world. The US doesn't want to do it. Any country needs to examine its role in the world, it's the US.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Chandra. I know that it is already 12:30, but we will extend a bit because we want to give, fair to the viewers. I think we have to take this one particular questions that been sent to us through email before these forums began this morning. It is from Zizu, who has several questions, but I only get a chance just to take one. Maybe the panelists can respond. What are your views on this prospect of normalization between Saudi, Indonesia, as well as other Muslim countries in the Middle East with Israel during Biden's presidency? Maybe response from the panelists?
Okay. Very quickly, so the brother Zaid and brother Azmi would also be able to respond to this important question. One doesn't know whether they will normalize ties with Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. I think the person who asked that question has been pointed to important countries. On the one hand, I wouldn't be shocked if it happens. Given what has been happening, I wouldn't be shocked because I think there are forces which are pushing in that direction. And it's not just Malaysia and the Saudis. I think Malaysia, there's also pressure to recognize Israel and so on. And as I said, there are forces that are pushing in that direction. These are the powerful Zionist forces, not just the Zionist forces as conventionally understood. Don't forget that the real push on behalf of Israel today comes from the Christian Zionists. They are much more powerful than the conventional Zionists. Christian Zionists. They're everywhere. They're very influential. Even in my own country, the Christian Zionists are influential. We don't talk about it, but they are influential in certain segments of our society. So I think there is the push from the Christian Zionists, and they would always, through the United States, of course, find out from a country whether it is inclined towards recognizing Israel, what the obstacles are, how it can be dealt with, and so on. I think that's going to happen because we have heard from individuals that whenever certain bilateral issues are raised, the United States and some other country, every now and then the US raises questions about Israel, the recognition of Israel. Pressure, directly or indirectly, is applied upon. So that's one aspect of reality, brothers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think there will be a lot of opposition to any recognition of Israel on the part of Indonesia or Malaysia or Pakistan, which is the other country which is under tremendous pressure, asking them to recognize Israel. This would come from the domestic populations, national communities in these countries. And also, I think there are groups within the vortex of the Palestinian struggle, right in the heart of the Palestinian struggle, who will resist this. And the greatest resistance is from Palestinians themselves, who really resist this.
Okay.
But I think, if I may finish very quickly, sorry, Azam,
yes,
I think one has to organize. One just can't say that there will be some resistance and not do anything about it. And organizing is very important. Mobilizing sentiment to prevent this sort of recognition from people. We say this, brother, not because we have a sort of knee-jerk reaction against Israel or because others are saying this. There is one fundamental reason that is forgotten very often. Somehow during this whole debate about the recognition of Israel by some Arab countries, this issue has been sort of very cleverly sidelined. How can one talk about recognizing Israel when in terms of international law, it is an occupying power. It is a country that is occupying other people's lands. And that question of occupation has not changed. It is a fundamental issue. You are giving credence to occupation. You're giving credence to a terrible injustice where you take away people's land, you drive them out, you kill them, you impose your will upon others, and you want recognition for this. Haven't we noticed this, that in spite of what had happened since 1979, the recognition of Israel by Egypt, 1994, Jordan, and ever since, that on substantial issues, Israel has not made a single concession. Not a single concession. As far as land is concerned, as far as territory is concerned. In fact, they've expanded their power, including, of course, what they've done vis-a-vis the Golan Heights. So they have not made any concession. They're not going to make a concession to the United Arab Emirates. All they said was, that maybe we'll freeze settlements for a while, but even that is not true now. As you know, they are trying to expand their settlements. So what are we doing? Why are these countries, Muslim countries, anyone else, why are they so shameless? You are prepared to make all these concessions and you get nothing in return for the Palestinian people who have suffered so much, who have paid such a high price for their struggle. Aren't we ashamed as human beings that we do not have the integrity to stand up for our people? 7 million, 10 million, maybe 15 million of them all over the world who have really stood up for justice. We allow them to be sacrificed at the altar of Israeli aggression and power and Israeli arrogance. It doesn't make sense. So I think the potential for resistance is there, but we have to organize it. Azmi?
Yes. Okay. Any response from the other panelists?
On this normalization and the Israel, it's a very central issue. And that will become another measurement of the Biden's administration to how far we will be able to address this, because U.S. has been, I usually call it the bigger Israel is U.S. and the smaller U.S. is Israel, because it is in maybe you can differentiate between Israel and the U.S. As U.S. as a government, U.S. people, a lot of are really in sympathy with the plights of the Israel, and I agree very much. I mean, aside from the policy devastation, the violations in human rights, it's about this is not just colonialism of taking a people's land, because you were there spread over Europe and you had agreement with Balfour saying that you can have this land of Palestine. You were not existing as a nation, and all of a sudden you decide to have this nation as your nation. You rob, you kill, you murder, you massacre, you just name it. I mean, for the last 73 years, and therefore this question of some Arab countries is sidelining it, and also that they are also repeating that once we have a two-state solution, that will be the ultimate goal. It's not happening on the ground. This two-state solution is no more a subject to be discussed on the Palestinians' notes. I mean, on the ground, things are very bad. And as Dr. Chandra was saying, there was no major concession by the Israel when they had deal with Egypt and the deal with Jordan. Nothing. Everything was in favor of them. So I think there must be a realization among first the Islamic countries, the leaders. Out of the 57, we can barely count probably 10, 15 to really be very firm to sound out what the US has to change their policies on this issue of Palestine. We have 57 countries roping into the OIC. And for all we know that this grouping is not effective at all. We have the Muslim minorities in around 115 countries all over the nation, all over the world, and they are still struggling to survive in India, in Kashmir, in Xinjiang. You just name it, a whole list of how we are so incapable of really addressing the issue. So this normalization with Israel is something that we have to really take seriously into the agenda of the Muslims, really forming up and doing in one voice to face up with any policies that the U.S. is going to back what Israel. Now, Israel, in the last thing I want to just point out, Israel is also a little bit weakened. I mean, Netanyahu is under trial, and for the last 2 years or 1 year or so more, they've got now coming up with a fourth election, I think. No country is facing this kind of turmoil. A small nation having to deal with your own political things, and now Biden is there. I don't think they have the same deal with Trump. So anyway, we have to really put our organization in order, our networking, our mobilization, our pressure on the international community to act on all these issues relating to foreign policies of America towards Muslim countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanya Azmi. There is we will entertain these last two questions, but very quick. This question is addressed to Dr. Zaid. Is from Nur Afida Ismail from the School of International Studies, UUM University Utara Malaysia. Dr. Zaid, this Nora Fida would like to know how the Muslim institutions or communities in the United States could bring the voices of Muslim societies across the globe to the Biden's administration. Is it necessary to look into the ways AIPAC influences the administration in pursuing Israeli interests? Dr. Zaid, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one thing is that if we recognize that American Muslims can be one of the most important keys to make the shifts in U.S. policy, that will be hugely beneficial in terms of achieving strategic objectives. Because if you think about reacting to a crisis of whether it's the Rohingya or other crises, we might spend millions of dollars just to try to send humanitarian aid. But if a fraction of that money was spent on lobbying power and empowering American Muslim organizations to lobby, to stand for these rights, the effect of the change or the pressure that the U.S. Policymakers and State Department can apply can be much stronger than equivalent to more than these millions of dollars that can go into humanitarian aid. So American Muslims are learning the game, learning how to influence the Congress, how to be to be at the table, how to speak the language. I mean, it's extremely hard lesson for us to learn. And that's why part of what I was trying to communicate today is how we can change our language so that the others listen and not just hear, oh, these are Muslims who are totally self-contradictory, Muslims who are totally self-serving, these Muslims who are totally without any principles, because this is how they treat each other in their own countries. Why they want the world to treat them better? Why would the world care about Palestine when they do this and that to their own, when they're the one who are abusers? So just go back to focus on Muslims have an important role. American Muslim can play a very important role in advocating these global principled positions towards human suffering everywhere in the world. So we are consistent and we are principled, and we build multilateral coalition inside the United States as well as outside the United States. Inside the United States, there are a lot of people who care about these positions. But so here, one of the things that I would like to also communicate to the global audience is that the way the U.S. government works. I mean, again, it's not a King Kong on top of a building and like something. It's chess. It's like I think was mentioned by Haji Azmi, that it is really made of all this massive number of thousands upon thousands of functionaries and teams and non-profit organizations and so on and so forth that are working. So you can have more than one way to influence a U.S. policy. We are learning the game, and we can definitely share that learning, and we can influence global policy through that cooperation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zaid. This one last question that we address to all the panelists, if we would like to respond. It is from Dr. Sharifa Munira Al-Atas. Will the Biden administration rethink the UN Security Council veto policy in the hope of bringing in more transparent multilateralism that will give a voice to the global South?
I think
Absolutely
there's a
not.
very strong campaign by Erdogan on what is called the world is bigger than five. You know,
Yeah.
these five veto powers in the UN Security Council has to be challenged. It has to be challenged very strongly. Uh, the you know the it is very clear. How can five countries decide on the fate of the rest? How can that be logically accepted? You know, it has to be really challenging. There must be a very strong mechanism to challenge this. And therefore, I think if the question is whether US would like to withdraw and dismantle this veto or wants to have a change, it is, I think it's almost like impossible. But unless the rest of the countries around the world, 180, 190 over, are very strong, and we have an alternative with pressuring the United Nations agencies, and UNSC is one of the major ones, to have a complete reform of the UN through the voices of the United Nations General Assembly. And there were so many groupings. We have the ASEAN groupings, we have the SSARC SAP groupings, we have the African Union groupings. If there's only way that we can sort of merge and really put pressure on the UN to what we call to dismantle this veto power, I think there will be a future. But the answer that is very difficult for US to withdraw from this arrangement.
You,
I would
Haji
make
Azmi?
a
Yes, please,
quick
Dr. Zaid. Yeah.
answer here that there's absolutely no prospect for the United States to support adding any other country simply because there's what's in it for the United States. So there's no way that this is can be of benefit for the United States unless that voice from the third world country is a satellite country that is just really can tow the U.S. policy, but even then, it's a huge risk for the U.S. Now, let me also emphasize. I mean, what is the model? Is it a single country? I remember in the example when Brazil was trying to be nominated as a potential candidate. Well, who was against that nomination? Well, Argentina was against that nomination. So it is that regional infighting when Japan wants to become, well, who is against Japan's nomination? Well, it is South Korea and other fellow Asians who are against it. So it is very easy to say, let's do this. But if the regional powers and the regional, countries do not accept that, so how do you expect the United States and others who are beneficiary of the existing system? The way you can become a, a member is by being extremely powerful, by building big alliances regionally, and that you prove yourself that you are indispensable to global affairs, and then that will make you a regional power. This is something that India it has not really achieved, despite having nuclear weapons. It takes a lot more than that to become part of the Security Council.
Okay, thank you. Prof. Chandra, do you have any response for that?
Yeah. Very quickly, I think it is wrong to just focus upon the veto power of 5 states, because that's not going to change. It is very significant that even if you look at the other 4 states of the US, no one is really interested in getting rid of the veto.
Yeah.
Not Russia, not China, certainly not Britain and France, who should not even be having the veto power, but they're all determined to keep their veto power. And if you look at other countries that want to come in, whether it is India or Japan or some of the other countries, they haven't really questioned the veto. In other words, they would like to be there with something like the veto power or something close to it. In other words, keep the structure. This is why I think those of us who are concerned about the UN, and the UN, I think, is worth preserving the situation that we're in. What we should look for instead is the strengthening of the General Assembly. Matters of war and peace. That, to my mind, is far more fruitful as a pathway to the future, rather than just focus on something which is almost impossible. The question of abolishing the veto. Look at the General Assembly. Is it possible to use the existing UN Charter, especially on matters pertaining to security, Chapter 6, Chapter 7, and so on, see how one can perhaps use those provisions and go beyond them to empower the General Assembly. So the General Assembly will discuss issues which are now the sole prerogative of the Security Council when it comes to international security, global politics, and so on. The General Assembly takes a stand. I think this is where the Global South has got a bigger say. Don't forget that on issues like Cuba, issues like Bosnia-Herzegovina, at one time, issues like even Palestine, it is the Global South that has been driving these issues, not the big powers. They've been able to say, look, let's at least discuss this, but can we strengthen their role and give them some power, give them some sort of teeth over issues pertaining to international politics and international security. I think that's it. Let me add very quickly to, since I know that Dr. Sharifa Munira is interested, very concerned about global politics and so on. I think as a strategy, countries that are in the UN make up the majority of the General Assembly. They should perhaps mobilize forces on other issues at this stage, rather than go straight for something which is really so fundamental to the power of the powerful. This is a way of strengthening ourselves. Go for other issues. Number one, can we demand that Biden in his first year will close down Guantanamo? It's a terrible injustice when you think about it. There are about 40 prisoners still left. And it so happens that they're all Muslims. The prisoners were there. It's terrible the way they have been treated without trial. Total violation of every human right you can think of. Can we ask that Guantanamo Bay be closed down? That was Obama's promise. He could not fulfill it, partly because the Congress was against it. Now you've got both the House of Representatives and the Senate, they are under the Democrats. Why can't you mobilize the US leadership? Mobilize to close Guantanamo? And why can't Muslim organizations in the United States make this a central focus? Closing down of Guantanamo. Something which is so inhuman. One should mobilize. A single issue, the focus is very clear, people understand this. Close down Guantanamo. The other issue, Brother Azam, which I think we should focus upon also very inhuman, is can the Biden administration, not in the first year, at least in its term of office, get rid of economic sanctions as a tool of global dominance? This is what is happening. Economic sanctions, they actually, we're going to war for other means. That's what it is. There's so many countries that are under sanctions, and the biggest culprit is the United States. Imposing sanctions everywhere. I mean, look at one particular country, Iran. You know, one of the reasons why Iran is suffering so much from the coronavirus crisis is because they're not able to purchase vaccines. They don't have the means because the whole banking system is totally crippled as a result of sanctions. Isn't this terrible? Yeah. Isn't it inhuman? Apart from what they're doing to the Palestinians, the Israelis, in relation to coronavirus crisis. Discrimination is so blatant. You know, Palestinians are getting the vaccines from other countries, but Israel itself, as the governing state, as the power, it has refused vaccines to the Palestinians. So, you know, when you think of things like this, and I'm hoping that perhaps Dr. Zaid, you know, his commitment to some of these causes, that he would try to convince groups in the United States of America that these are issues that one should take up also. And link up with people in other parts of the world, not just Muslims, everyone. We talked about a global coalition just now, you know, with various groups coming together, mobilize, come together on things like this, which are very tangible. People understand what these issues are. Palestine, vaccines, Iran, vaccines, and under question of economic sanctions, yeah. Guantanamo. I think these are the things that we should carry.
Would like to quickly jump in here and try to also address one thing to, in a sense, build on Dr. Chandra's approach, is that one thing about what is exactly the problem that we're trying to solve, and why is the United Nations Security Council and the veto power, why do we think that is the obstacle to achieve what we want to achieve? So sometimes we create obstacles, imaginary obstacles, and yes, it probably has power on the ground, but in reality, if we actually want to achieve a goal, there is 1,001 ways to go around to innovate and work around this problem and achieve the goal. But sometimes we get stuck on this. Let's work around it. And here when we go to some real problems that exist on the ground, I mean, one thing, I was mentioned is that Guantanamo, the issue was at one point is that there's no Muslim country want to accept these 40 prisoners. I mean, it was taking personal phone calls from Obama to the Saudis and to other countries to accept the Saudi prisoners at Guantanamo and other places. Only very few countries, and still that's one of the reasons that that country exists there. But then sometimes
I think Congress was also a problem.
It was, but
during Obama's time.
But see, it does not help when not a single Muslim country want to accept them or volunteer to accept them. So that is part of the problem, at least. But if we can provide a solution, but let me tell you, let me pose another challenge that are a lot easier to deal with. There are currently hundreds, and at one point there were thousands of mostly Muslims at this island of Vinunu in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Where Australia sent all these illegal immigrants, and they were stayed there for years and years and years, and Vinuna and in Papua New Guinea. They were in a most miserable situation. And again, there were people who were, very easy to deal with. They are not terrorists. They are not a security risk. But the world didn't care, including Muslim world, did not care about their plight. So sometimes we're focusing, yes, there are a tragedy of the 40 people at Guantanamo if they are truly innocent and didn't do anything. And there are many other easier problems that are just as severe that we can address. And then as we address these issues, we build experience at how to solve these problems. And then we are walking the walk. And that's why when I was saying that we talk the talk, but we need to walk the walk and actually work on the solutions, small solutions and then bigger solutions, and not accept no for an answer. We don't accept the current structure as an obstacle to what we want to do, because there is a will, there is a way with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have exceeded our emergency time, but I think it's a very fascinating discussion. But before we wrap up for this event today, can I call upon Prof. Chandra? We will give every panelist just only 1 minute to give a last few words. Prof. Chandra, you have a last few words?
I just want to pick up the point which Zaid just made. I think it's important. There is a certain lethargy amongst a lot of the educated, the well-heeled in the world as a whole, and not just Muslims. But Muslims are guilty because in many instances, their own kindred kind are the victims, which is not the only reason why you should react. You should react because these are human beings, right? But they're not reacting. You take, for instance, the refugee problem in the world. Mobilizing funds for refugees. The vast majority of refugees are Muslims. Very few Muslim countries are prepared to come forward and say, yes, this is what we want. They spend money on all sorts of other things. You don't have to go into that. Because there are also Muslim countries that are very wealthy. So I think there is a problem of lethargy, of lukewarm attitude, not really wanting to respond to human tragedy and human suffering and so on. And it is a question which goes to the very heart of the human condition. Why is it that human beings are not capable of responding in a situation like this? Of course, we blame a lot of other factors, including we blame God, we blame Allah, and we say, why is Allah left us in this situation? But we don't realize that basically it is us, our inability to respond to challenges like this. And how we're going to overcome this is something that we should think about, but more than think about, we should act. I think if there are more examples, people act, people stand up, try to prove that something can be done, others will also act. Example is very important. Maybe that is one of the many, many possible solutions.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Chandra. Dr. Zaid, please.
I would like to leave the audience, thank you for listening and for your patience. And I would like to say from my exposure to the Muslim world and the global world and dealing with intellectuals and activists from around the world, one thing, two things became clear to me. One is that if you think we are in trouble, actually we are 10 times in trouble as much as you think. On the other hand, if you think there are room for solution and there's potential, then there is really 1,000 times the potential for solution and for making things better than you can think and imagine right now. But it only takes for us. So what's needed is individual efforts and a network of organizations working towards a common goal. We are the ants that can get together and really change the world and prove itself. So there is a huge potential. So just do not let imaginary obstacles or obstacles that we were told are too strong or too high to overcome. Don't let that stand between us and the change. But we need to know what is the change that we want, and then we put the efforts together. This is possible. We can do it, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaid. Tuan Haji Azmi, please.
Yeah, thank you. My view is that yes, there's a really room for us to work on. There's so many initiatives have been done, but we have to also conscious about the reality. I mean, we work on the reality. Though we have all this idealism of having a different situation, but the reality has kind of needs for us to articulate it very well, and you know how to handle the reality and work from that angle. All these issues that we see today, from the sufferings of the people, the ones that we see in the refugee camps, and then people are tortured in detention. Those are real issues that has to be sounded, has to be louder, because they really need our help. People in Guantanamo, we cannot say to them, sorry, it's difficult for us to help you, but we have to voice their sufferings. We cannot allow that to go on. While we do the ones that we are able to practically solve, as Zaid was saying, that work on the easy parts first. But then again, I would say there's some things that we have to voice. We have to just voice it so that somebody pick this up and then try to resolve. And my hope is that again, this mobilization of Muslims, the Ummah, is really a subject that we need to really work on at different levels: scholars level, the students level, the youth, the civil societies, the politicians. We have to really link every one of us to work on a common goal and to deal with the situation of the world today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuan Haji Azmi. With that, we wrap up our forum today on Biden's presidency, the future of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and the Muslim world. On behalf of IAIS Malaysia and the co-organizers, JAS, MAPIM, and also MIG, we would like to thank our panelists, Prof. Chandra Muzaffar, Dr. Zaid Barzinji, and also Tuan Haji Muhammad Azmi Abdul Hamid for joining us discussing on this important forum. For our Chinese fellows, we would like to wish you Kongzi Fat Chai. We're going to celebrate this New Year tomorrow, starting later today. For Dr. Zaid, good night from Malaysia. And to our two other panelists, take care. And to all of viewers, we wish you everyone a very good day. Thank you very much for joining us. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Till then, we meet you again.